can either just be like a normal, program that effectively just runs, does its task, and then exits. And then you have other ones that act more like background processes to perform a constant service that's just constantly running in the background. So that's a general idea with payloads, and you can load them by either sending them to the console, as when you load the jailbreak, there's an elf loader that runs in the background that is waiting for payloads to be sent to it. So you can use another device like your phone or computer with a payload injector application or just Netcat or SOCAT to send the payload over to the console, and it will automatically execute it once it receives the payload. So that's one way to load them. You also have payload managers like this one in Void Shell, where you can add your payloads and then just send whichever ones you want over to the console. That's what I'm going to be using for this video. But then there's also the autoloaders. So starting jailbreaks like the Blu-ray jailbreak, the YouTube jailbreak, the Lua Core jailbreak can use an autoloader so that once the jailbreak is loaded, it will automatically load any payloads that you specify directly from the internal storage on the console or on a USB drive that's connected to the console as well. So lots of different ways that you can load your payloads. So let's go ahead and get the obvious ones out of the way first. So the first one, of course, is going to be Kstuff or Kstuff Lite, which is the successor to Kstuff. So Kstuff Lite is effectively the main jailbreak payload for consoles that do not have a hypervisor exploit available, and it will allow for running your PS4 fake packages and your PlayStation 5 game dumps and certain homebrew applications that otherwise would not run without it. So it is a vital payload that is needed if you do not have a hypervisor exploit available for your firmware. So for most jailbroken PS5s, you will be using Kstuff. Now, of course, there's also the all-in-one payloads like ETA-hen and Void Shell. So ETA-hen effectively uses Kstuff, as does Void Shell as well. They have Kstuff built in, so they are still using Kstuff, but they also have additional features added on top. ETA-hen has a daemon process that's required to run certain homebrew applications like the homebrew store and items flow, so ETA-hen is required for those. And then, of course, it also has its own settings menu with a ton of different settings that you can customize, and services like an FTP server, remote package installer, inbuilt cheats, and many, many other features that are built in there. And Void Shell is a different take on an all-in-one payload, where instead of having all of the settings, added to the console itself, instead it runs a web server and has all of its settings on a web panel that you can access remotely from any other device, like a package installer, file manager, payload manager, and many, many other useful features. So those are your kind of all-encompassing, all-in-one payloads. Most of the other payloads are much smaller and just perform one specific task, so that's what we're going to go through here. So the first one we have is bdj unpatched elf. If I run that on the console, it will just send it over, and that patches the bdj-stack.jar. So what this payload does is it unpatches the Blu-ray jailbreak on firmwares above 7.61. So the Blu-ray jailbreak was patched by PlayStation in 8.0 and higher firmwares, but if you have another jailbreak that you can use to jailbreak the console, you can unpatch it by sending this payload, which replaces the BDJ stack file for an older version of the stack file that was still vulnerable to the Blu-ray jailbreak, and by doing that, it will then make your console vulnerable to be jailbroken with a Blu-ray disc. So you have another way that you can jailbreak your console after running this payload. You only have to send this payload once, and that's it. It will now be unpatched indefinitely, unless, of course, you reinstall your firmware, update your firmware, or, of course, reset your console via safe mode. That will patch the Blu-ray jailbreak again, and then you would have to resend this payload, but otherwise, you should be good to go. Next, we have ShadowMount Plus. So this payload, of course, allows you to run your PlayStation 5 game dumps. You put your game dumps on your USB drive or copy them to the internal storage, and when you go ahead and run this payload, it will install them to create the shortcut on the home menu, so it will just appear like any other application on your home screen, and you'll be able to launch it and run the game. If you have Kstuff running, of course, you'll be able to load that game. So that's the core functionality, but it has a lot of other additional features built in. It now, for instance, supports loading games as exFAT images or UFS2 images, which is just a different format where you can have your games stored inside one file, and it can mount that file and load it. So that's been added, and also backport functionality has been built in, so that if you're trying to run a game that has a backport installed on an older firmware, so a game that requires a higher firmware normally, you can run them on older firmwares with backports, but that normally requires a separate payload for the backport, but that's now built into ShadowMount Plus, so that when we load a game like Astrobot on an old firmware like 4.3 here, you can see it does detect that the game has a backport installed and enables that backport to allow me to run a game like Astrobot here on an old firmware. So it has all of those features and more built into ShadowMount Plus. So next we have the FTP server payloads. This one is pretty self-explanatory. You can run this payload on your console and it will run an FTP server on the PS5 on port 22121. Then all you need to do is simply open up a FTP client like WinSCP or FileZilla, enter the IP address of your PS5 in the host box, port number 2121, connect, and you will now have access to your PS5 file system where you can take any files that you have stored on the console and you can download them, copy them over somewhere on your computer, and of course you can also upload files from that device to the console. It's much faster and more efficient than trying to move files from a USB drive between your computer and your console. This is just much more convenient to connect remotely and quickly drag and drop files between your console and your device. But next we have the Chronic Loader. Chronic Loader allows you to update your payloads for your autoloader. So if you're using any of the jailbreaks that have an autoloader that autoload payloads after the jailbreak is loaded, well, this will automatically update them for you to the latest versions, and it does this through a configuration file that you can update through an HTML file where you can add links to the different repos for your various different payloads. Once you add all of those repos, you can then generate the config file and then copy it into the data folder. Just create a Chronic Loader folder and copy the config file inside. And then whenever the Chronic Loader payload is loaded, it will effectively check that config file and update all of the payloads from the repos. It will download the latest versions of the payloads and replace the ones in your autoloader folder with the latest versions so that you don't have to manually swap out each payload whenever there's a new version available. So definitely a very handy payload. You can also, of course, add the Chronic Loader payload itself into your autoloader. That way, whenever you run the jailbreak, it will automatically load and update all of your payloads whenever you load the jailbreak, so they're always up to date. Definitely a handy one. That's a fairly recent payload. Next, we have the Garlic Save Manager, also a fairly recent payload as well. So when we load this payload, so it runs a web server on 8082, you can simply go to your PS5's IP address with :8082 in a web browser running on a device that's on the same network as your PS5, and then you have access to all of your PS5 and PS4 saves that are on the console. And you can decrypt your saves, encrypt them, refind them, and also import your save files as well. You can also mount your save data. So for instance, I've got Astrobot here that I installed with ShadowMount Plus. So if I go ahead and run Astrobot, you can see that I do not have any saves currently available for the game, but I have downloaded a 100% completed save that has all of the levels unlocked. So if I want to install that save file, I can simply use Garlic Save Manager here by going over to Astrobot, finding the save file, which is this one here, selecting it. That mounts the save file, and then we have this memory.dat file here. And I can essentially just replace this by right-clicking and selecting Upload File, and then I have an Astrobot completed save file here that I can select, and then open it and replace the file. That uploads the decrypted save file, replaces the original, and then I can unmount it. And as simple as that, I've now replaced that save, so when I go back on Astrobot, you can see the save file has now been changed to a 100% completed save, which has access to all of the levels, including all of the bonus levels, all unlocked. Similar to the Garlic Saves website, except this runs on your console so that you don't have to rely on other people's consoles to re-sign your save files and perform any save operations. You can do all of that on your own console where you have control, so lots of useful options there. The other payload, of course, we have here is Nano DNS. Now, I keep harping on this payload. I've mentioned it a few times in different videos because I think it is a very important payload that people should be using. If we go ahead and run this here, you can see Nano DNS is running, so this one is from Drakmore. So the way that Nano DNS works is that when you're setting up your DNS settings in your console, instead of using a DNS blocker like a public DNS address like this one, you just set 127.0.0.1, which is the local host, and that will fail to resolve domain names entirely. So no domain names can be resolved, which effectively blocks everything on the console. So when you're not running the jailbreak, everything is blocked. However, when you do run the jailbreak, and you're loading Nano DNS, as I'm loading it here, you can see it does successfully connect to the internet. That's because Nano DNS runs its own sort of relay server on the console, which then allows the connection through, but it has its own filter that filters out any connections to Sony servers, effectively blocking system and game updates, preventing you from accidentally updating the console. So for instance, if we go into System here, and we go to System Update, and we try to update the system software using the internet, it just says it cannot connect to the server. And of course, it's the same if you try and update your games. If we check for update, you can see cannot connect to server. So it's effectively blocking system and game updates, but it will allow internet access. For instance, if I try and access this website here, you can see it loads no problem. And of course, I can go to Google. I load Google. That also loads. So we have internet access, but everything else is blocked. And then when we're not running this payload anymore, because we have the DNS address set to 127.0.0.1, you just will not have any connections. So the updates will still be blocked. So basically, you only get an internet connection when you're running the jailbreak, but it is a filtered connection that is protected from updates. There is also a similar payload recently released by Al-Azif that can also be used for the same purpose. So the next one we have is np fake signin-ps5. So there's a problem when you fake activate your accounts on the PS5, which is that certain features do not get unlocked. Now, when you have an account that is activated versus a local accounts do not have access to remote play, and they don't have the ability to copy save files for PS4 saves from the console to a USB drive and vice versa. So you have to fake activate your account to access those features, but on the PS5, even when you fake activate your account, those features are still locked off. If you try and go to copy to USB drive on any PS4 saves, it says you have to sign into PlayStation Network. If you try to access the remote play settings, you will see it's grayed out and not selectable to enable remote play. So to fix this, you can use this payload np-fake-signin, you run it, and then it says signed in, reboots to apply. You have to reboot your console. When you reboot and sign back into your profile, those features will now be enabled. You can see that remote play is now accessible. I can toggle it on and off. And of course, I can also go into my PS4 saves and select a save file and copy it to USB drive, and it no longer gives me an error message. It allows me to do that and basically performs the sign-in action so that the console thinks that your account is signed in properly, and therefore those features are unlocked. And you do not want to run it on any accounts that are online activated, so accounts that have actually signed into PSN, because they should already be properly activated and be able to access the remote play settings and the PS4 save settings to copy to USB. So do not run it on those accounts, only on accounts that have been offline activated. Next, we have the PS5 app dumper. So this payload, of course, is used to dump your PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 retail games. So any games that you have on disc or games that you purchase from the PlayStation Store that you still have access to on your jailbroken console, you can dump them and turn them into a game dump version that you can run as a backup on your jailbroken console, so that if you ever lose the license or the disc gets damaged or lost, then you will have a copy that you can run without it. So that is the general idea. You run the payload, it starts dumping the game to a USB drive, and once it's dumped, you will find it in a homebrew folder on the root of your USB drive, and there will be the game dump folder, which will just be the title ID of the game-app, and in there you will find all of your dumped files. It also decrypts all of the executables, and for PlayStation 5 game dumps, I believe it also fixed signs them so that they can be loaded immediately through something like ShadowMount on the PS5, so you can immediately get up and running with your dumped game as a game backup. So that's another very handy payload there as well. And last but not least, we also have the web server payloads. We'll also run a web server, this time, of course, on port 8080, and it is to be used in conjunction with the Homebrew Launcher application. And then you can use this to load Homebrew applications and certain payloads directly on the console with this. So it's a pretty handy application there. Things like the offline account activator, the dump runner from EchoStretch, the dump installer, along with a bunch of game ports, homebrew games, and emulators that can all be loaded through the Homebrew Launcher as well. And finally, I almost missed this last payload, PS5 Debug, which is used to remotely debug the PS5 from another device. You can connect debugging tools used to read and write memory, remotely call functions and apply breakpoints, and is also used by trainers to remotely apply cheats to your PS5 games, so another very handy payload as well. So that is another thing that you've got access to. So anyway, those are sort of the main payloads that I wanted to cover here in this video. Yeah, there may be one or two that I missed that you might find important, and if so, definitely leave them in the comments and let people know about them. But those are the main ones that I could think of off the top of my head. there are definitely some handy payloads to have. So anyway, that's going to do it for this video. So hope you guys enjoyed it or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And as always,